Wednesday, March 27th is Pink Shirt Day. Pink Shirt Day is a Canadian event that began over a decade ago in the Maritimes, I think it was in Nova Scotia, when a young man came to the first day of high school wearing a pink t-shirt and was bullied. The president of the student council found out about this, and he and a friend decided that being bullied for wearing a pink shirt was unacceptable. He went to the dollar store, and he and his friend bought 50 pink t-shirts and began to distribute them. They also went on social media and advertised the event. The next day, when the boy arrived at school, everyone was wearing a pink t-shirt. It was like a burden had lifted from his shoulders. The Premier of British Columbia found out about this and named Pink Shirt Day as the final Wednesday of February in that province. The rest of the country has since followed suit. You can get a chance to win this fabulous pink Lego trophy built by the inestimable Jason Basilak. All you have to do is, on Wednesday, wear a pink t-shirt, take a picture of yourself, post it on social media, and send it to Engineering Positive Space, along with a paragraph talking about why solidarity is important.
So today we're talking about the CDS. We'll get that started today. And just before we get into the content, we're going to go over some of the process. What happens in the next couple weeks. So this week, some of you have already gotten the debrief, and the rest of you will be getting it later in the week. From your TA. So you've already done one revision of your documents, and you finalized it for your TA. Get your feedback on that. 2 forms. Remember, it's very important to capture your notes and the discussion that occurs in that debrief. After that, you turn that into your, you make those comments, you revise them PR again, and that's when you get into your EM. Your EM must approve this document for professionalism before it can go to the client and before you can have your second client meeting. Next, or some of you are trying to get it in Friday, we'll work with that on a case-by-case basis. After that, you do your DRG the week after that. So that's DRG is Design Review Gateway. They've started to do some designing at that point, right? Some initial design ideas that you present in tutorial. Gives you a chance to do some practice on presentations. Also get some feedback on your design process. And we'll be lecturing on that next Monday. And before that, your LLS review. Trying to make a note before I forget about the LLS. Everything that's happening this week is pretty prime LLS, potentially prime LLS territory. For instance, if you know that you have a decision coming up, which we'll be getting to later, as a team, it's something you're going to have to figure out probably in the next week or so. You might want to make sure you take good notes on that and capture the evidence of that. Does that mean like it's something you want to track the progress of, given that it might be an LLS topic? And just to know, we will have time in the evening coming up later this week, as well as on Saturday, for you to get assistance from the CI towards your LLS, and there'll be announcements going out about that within the next day or so.
Okay.
Right, now we're going to go through a little bit of a more complicated process. Okay.
So over reading week, what I did with my reading week, one of the things I did was, in order to ensure consistency between tutorials, I read one project requirements from each tutorial along with the TA's comments to ensure that the comments we're all in line with the understanding that you're getting from lectures, et cetera, et cetera. I saw really a wide variety of qualities, from really failing PRs to some really quite good ones. And this morning, we did our pre-benchmarking for the conceptual design specification. So I'm going to give you some information that also comes from the TAs and that is important for you to successfully move through the next 3 weeks. One of the most important ones is that the revisions for your project requirements have to be done before you give it to your engineering manager, and you must get the approval of your engineering manager before you can give your project requirements to your client. Some of you have a lot of work to do, believe me, from what I have seen. Key to the work that I have seen that has to be done are things like research, so that every statement that is made in the document is backed up by credible evidence, and that includes the stakeholders section. You can't just make stuff up. The functions and objectives and constraints form the basis of the comparison for the alternatives in the conceptual design specification. So if you have not created usable metrics, you're going to have to fix them, and you're going to have to fix them before you go to see your client, because the second client meeting is a place where you and the client agree on the basis of the designs that are to come. And so all of that has to be done. It has happened. It doesn't happen to a lot of teams, but it has happened to teams that they have not gotten their EM approval on their project requirements prior to the deadline for their second client meeting, which is March 8th this year. Some of them have run as close to the deadline for the CDS before they've gotten approval from their EM. So you don't want to get stuck in that very bad loop where you keep getting asked for more and more and more revisions. So today we're going to talk about the conceptual design specification. We're going to focus on two aspects of it: the revisions to the project requirements, which is very, very key, and you'll find out more if you already had your tutorial. You've already spoken to your TA. You'll find out more in your PR debrief if you haven't had it. And we're going to look at some examples of the other sections. I was really lucky. We had a CDS from last term was recommended to us by the TA who graded it, and especially she recommended it because of the measures of success section. So we're going to take you through that. There's some very good things in that CDS and some things that can be improved, but it is a good example to go through so that you see some of the things to do for the conceptual design specification.
Yep. Which brings us to our first Alex of the day.
Two minutes.
Remember that section 6 to 8 are the alternative designs, the proposal designs, and the measures of success. These are all obviously skills that we want you to learn throughout the design process. So which ones are we looking at for those? Section specific.
So what do you do now? Do you like touch the right one?
Yeah, like this.
Ah, like that. Is that the one you wanted?
I haven't decided yet.
Hi. Say it. Okay, 21 seconds. La 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 la. Oh yeah. So is it done? Is it turned off? All right.
All right, so the answer, this one's closed.
People have, yeah. What? We'll come back to it.
We'll come back to the answer to this so that we know we had all the right ones. And so here is the PR rubric for you. This PR revision rubric, part of the CDS. So what we're looking for here, like the big lesson here is a big thing to remember, we've said this before, is the PR, the primary requirement remains a living document. Or an iterated document, meaning that it's very rare for you to get it 100 or even nearly 100% right on the first pass. Because your team is staking a claim, is making arguments in your TR, and they might be good arguments, they might need some improvement, but they also might need some renegotiation. Your client or your TA might just disagree and you have to change it according to that. So the PR revision is very, very key because again, you can't do a CDS without a PR. And you
Okay.
and sometimes don't know what a good PR is yet until you've actually worked with it a little bit.
Okay.
The process of CDS, keep that PR open and keep revising.
Okay, if you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. Good. I want to make 2 comments. Keep in mind that what we talk about in lecture is the way that these things are going to be graded. And if we don't see in a document reflections of what we talked about in lecture, then you don't do well in that document. So notice that at the top of the rubric, the meets expectations column is the exceeds expectations column is everything that's in meets expectations plus. And I also want you to notice research is important. If there's one message in this lecture, it's that in a situation where there are no right answers, your marks are going to be totally dependent on your ability to show that you made decisions in a unique and credible fashion with evidence from research. So you'll find out more about your unique PR from your TA, what you have to do to fix that up before you can go to the EM. Now we're going to go through the alternatives section and what we're looking for there. In the introduction to the alternatives, you have to talk about how you came up with all of these ideas. And one of the things that the TAs talked about this morning that they really, really hate is when students put into the introduction just labels of processes without talking about how they used the process or what their thinking was. So I want you to keep in mind that if you just say, we used brainstorming, or you just say, we used the black box method, or we used Scamper, you will get no marks for those words. Those will be wasted words. Yes?
We explain in depth in the appendix rather than in the introduction.
Ah. If you explain in depth in the appendix rather than in the introduction, that is pretty good, but remember the appendix is optional reading for the TA, so he or she doesn't have to look at it. So if you summarize or get a key idea from that detailed explanation, then that's really going to help. So if you've used Scamper and you have modified existing products, you're doing a custom off the shelf, and basically everything's based on modification, then saying that you use modify, instead of just saying we use Scamper, really helps the reader understand. But then inside the appendix, you can then go into detail, which would be great.
Yeah. Because think about it from a TA perspective. If you say we use black box method or we use this method for idea generation, anyone can just say that. But if you have a specific thing as to the reason that you use that and a specific way that it maybe perhaps balance trade-offs or some kind of way that it has actual effect on your specific design process, that becomes meaningful description as opposed to just identifying a goal or a tool that you use without any additional information.
So let's take a look at what that looks like and pick out where are the marks in this particular introduction and where are they not.
This is an example from the fall, an actual CDS that was turned in that did pretty well. So once you identify what is it doing pretty well, and what would you, if this was your team and you're making some editorial comments on this in your final pass, what might you say?
The sentence is very long.
I thought it was a long sentence. Like the design focus on taking advantage of
Oh, that's the second sentence.
Sorry?
That's the second sentence. The opening sentence is really short.
Are we talking about the top paragraph?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But that's a run-on sentence.
Yeah.
You wrote the same thing as me?
What about Scamper? Did it get them any marks?
Well, like, you don't know how reliable they are. Like,
What did they do with Scamper?
that you don't know.
No, you don't know
They
anything.
didn't describe anything. If
No.
anything, either cut it out or develop on it more, but those are just words.
Yeah. You've done it. Are you on?
Sorry, I was
You're doing that. No, I see. You've got like 3 things going.
multitasking.
Yes. So, you know, McLuhan says that when you use a device, you're extended into it, but you also auto-amputate at the same time. So if somebody's using 3 devices, they're A, overextended, and B, somewhat amputated, I would think.
I'm guilty of using too often, though. My husband hates that I'm always on my phone watching TV. It drives him nuts.
I play Spider Solitaire while I watch TV. And it's really hard because I have to read the subtitles because I'm watching an Icelandic show. Indeed. Okay, get ready to press submit. Do you have any questions before we kind of go over this?
Is there any questions based on like what you can't decide is a good or a bad thing here? CO9? Any questions?
Do you have a question? Oh, he just had a hand.
Any questions on this? All right, so if any questions, we have a little bit of time in this lunch for questions. If you have any specific questions, maybe on something that your team's struggling with on the CDS and some of these decisions you have to make, please do chime in. All right, so what we're seeing and what the TA saw as some good aspects of this is a lot of it is in the first paragraph. The framing is specific to their project. Obviously, we don't see the whole document. We don't know how they scope this exactly. But they made a decision to determine that they could create 3 different designs based on using a few aspects of the technology across all 3 designs. So all 3 designs are somehow going to use the dimensions of the hardware itself. They were all using dots, and they were all conveying time. I think earlier in it they had specified a very specific app that they were using to do time. That was already set. But notice how it does it. It's not closing down their space unnecessarily because they're claiming that while using all these techniques across designs, they're still able to generate different designs. And as was identified by a few teams up here that I talked to, it's in the second paragraph where you start to run into some of the vagueness, some of the using the words but not necessarily using the terms and the tools, but not necessarily getting a lot of specific information and unique information. For instance, we don't know what these tools, if these tools affected the order of importance for use, reliability, and flexibility. We know that they matter, but we don't know specifically if they were ranked differently or if there were trade-offs in between these that you had to deal with. And do we even mention 3 tools if you're not really going to get into any of them? Which of the tools was actually the important one that really had a measurable effect on the process? Because this is, so that's a good point. One thing to remember is that you're not being marked in this class on the designs that you create. You're really being marked on the process you follow to create those designs. And that's why we harp so much on this stuff. On not just the tool that you use, but how did you use the tool? Because if you use the tool well, if you use the process well, that process is there to create designs that you can defend and compare. So it's not just about the end product, it's about how you got there. And that's the part that you really should be describing.
So one student said that the second sentence in the first paragraph is far too long and it's a run-on sentence, and that may be true, but it does have an important piece of information in it that is something that really helps you save a lot of words when you go into the alternatives. All of the alternatives are using the edge of the device as part of the design. And so because they all do this, the students can put that common idea into the introduction, and it means they don't have to keep repeating it.
This is background information that helps the reader with every single alternative.
One of the things that you're very good at doing, and students have been very good at doing this for the last few years, is making sure that each of the alternative sections is parallel. And you do that by having a description of the design, a figure, and a table where you compare the design against the objectives. Now, this one is pretty good, and certainly the students really managed to keep it parallel, but I'm going to tell you something the TAs said about it that I think is really important. They did not like, and they do not like, when the alternatives begin with a description of the process of using the alternative. You would never start a lab by just looking at the instructions of what the procedure is. You always start by looking at what is the equipment. And here too, you can't go into the process of using the design until you give a description of what the design is. They do have a very nice figure, but a figure on its own without the words is not helpful. So this really should get elaborated and go first. What is the concept of the design, and how does that concept get physically realized in the design so that then we can find out how to use it and it starts to make sense. Then you have a figure. Then you have a table. One of the things that impressed the TAs about this table is that unlike many, they also incorporated the functions and the constraints. Now, a lot of you will say, but if it doesn't meet the constraints, it can't be considered anyway, and that's true. So you may not have the words to completely follow this pattern, but it is interesting that they do include all of this, and they have some metrics to go along with them. I will say that the TA marking this did have a lot of comments in this section as well. They weren't completely happy with everything, but I just want the takeaway to be how everything was set up very neatly and very parallel. The proposed conceptual design over the years has become a shorter and shorter section, but its main intention is to create a circle and come back to where the project started. You've spent all this time in the PR and the CDS looking at how do we work with this technically as engineers. Now you have to come back to the client's perspective and show how the engineering will actually meet the client want.
So one way you can think about this is an argument that you're making, it's 7.0. And one way you can kind of test and review your CDF at a later stage is that oftentimes section 7.0 can almost act as a response to the problem statement. You can almost think about it as a call and response. The problem statement is describing what your client needs, what the scope of the gap is, and this should be arguing for why your proposed solution answers that client need and matches that scope and that gap. Right? So obviously everything else, all the sections between those matter a lot as well, but you can look at those two sections in parallel and they should kind of make sense together.
In addition, you can use 7.0 to look at aspects of the proposed design that you could not look at when you were presenting it in absolute parallel with the other two designs. It may have some features that the other things didn't have, and you may want to talk about them now. It may have some unique trade-offs that the other ones don't represent, and you may want to talk about them now, especially in relation to meeting the client want. You'll notice that the students used the same figure in 7.0 as they had used in 6.3. You know, that's not a terrible thing to do, but it's not very helpful. It's not getting them any new marks. In the previous section, somebody said, well, what would they do? And what I would suggest is if there was some further elaboration that you could create a visual for that wasn't parallel, this is where you would put it. So you would give more information, and visual information than you already had. I just want you to notice they did come back to what they thought was how they were meeting the client want. And it basically all they're saying is the client wants some use for Canvas, here's a use.
They even use the phrase meets the client's wishes, right? That might not be the best language there, but it references back to that problem statement, it references back to the initial problem that you came up with, and it's doing a lot of work to kind of hold this document together and make it cohesive.
So we're going to go into the measure of success in more detail on Wednesday, but I want to give you a sense of what that section looked like in a CDS from last term that the TA specifically identified as an excellent measure of success. So the measure of success is a very important aspect of the CDS because it really creates the foundation for your design review gateway and your final presentation. The final presentation is a presentation of the measure of success. It's where you show the client and others how the design works and why it's feasible. So let's take a look at what this group of students did. You can see that they have an introduction, that they have a series of tests, but most importantly, they created a low-fidelity prototype of their design, and that does a lot of things. You know, one of the reasons people put in all those words that I've already said don't put in, like scamper and black box method and all of those words, is that they want to show that they understand the course. They have used course material. But it's actually not just the use of course material, but the adaptation of course material to the specific needs of the project that gets you a lot of marks, that puts you over into exceeds expectations. And that's why the TA was so impressed by this. We had all done low fidelity prototypes in lecture, And they carried that forward, redid it, and it enables us to experience their design, roughly.
And just without even reading this, you can see some communicative, some deliberate decisions at work. You can see the parallel structure, even though it's a little interrupted by the purpose of the parallelism of the photo, but that's fine. The photo was there to support a specific section of it that asked for a photo, that a photo would help. But other than that, once you read 8.1, you know what 8.2 is going to look like, you know what 8.3 is going to look like. And so this just guides the reader's kind of path of information very clearly and makes it so that that information gets through as easily as possible, right? Because you want to be rigorous, you want to be deep, right? But you want the actual communication of that rigor to be as smooth and clean and minimal as possible, right? And this is visually structuring it is one of the things that really helps you do that.
So before we get to the final Alex, which is going to be the exit ticket, our takeaway is that you should be making your decisions consciously and deliberately, and you should be able to express in the document and to the client and to the TA and to the engineering manager what those deliberations were. In the alternatives section, we want to see all of the alternatives being equally viable and being presented in an equal manner so that as the reader reads it, they can be comparing them in their minds. One of the key problems in current project requirements in this class is the lack of viable research for statements that have been made. So you'll find out in your debrief where your TA has been discontent if you don't have good research, or where they've been very content because you do. Research is important, and it is how you back up the credibility of your statements. You have to describe your thinking process, not just the systematic methods, and everything is based on the project requirements.
And you'll notice how many times the word decision is in this slide. Decisions are very important. Making decisions, documenting them, backing them up, arguing for them, and actually agreeing on them as a team. And so a lot of this document is there, and this process of facilitate these decision-making processes at all levels of the design process. And that kind of leads us into our exit team. So as you kind of week off, now you get back into your teams and start thinking about what are the big decisions to make over the next couple of weeks. What's something your team needs to decide on? Are you still unclear on your scope? Is there a piece of information you need? Either research, or could be a skill that you want to create a prototype of your design. Is there a skill you need to learn to do that? Do you need to do another site visit? Do you realize that your documentation of the location of your design is inadequate? You need to go back there and take some pictures, take some measurements. Okay? So what is the decision you estimate? What is the knowledge or skill that you need? That could be a question that you didn't ask your client, and you should probably make sure you ask them next time, perhaps. And for number 3, I want you to note that the word method is very open. The method could be going to see a librarian, could be having a team meeting about this specific kind of conflict or decisions that you have to make. Or it could be using a decision-making tool or an ideation tool.
Did you say voice command game? Wow.
They haven't given us that.
It's very nice.
I want to.
Are you done? Yes. So that was not a questioning face. That was a I am done face. It's okay.
Can I get an evaluation from answers?
Oh. So, so this one doesn't match that one. Because when I read that one and this one, it seems to me that what you really need to do is benchmark. Because you can't make that decision if you haven't benchmarked those. And like either thing is fine, you know? So you have to see what's there. You have to see if you have to create something absolutely new or if you can modify something that's there or use it as is. So those are a bunch of decisions that I see coming out of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's inputs and outputs.
Yeah, but
It doesn't always have to be mass energy or information.
Okay.
Often it is,
Yeah.
but it can be.
Anything.
I mean, you can do the black box method around energy
Yeah.
if that's the focus of your design.
Okay.
Because it's just, you know, like if you look at an internal combustion engine,
Yeah.
what is the input of an internal combustion engine?
To be honest, I don't know. I'm not into cars.
Fuel. What's the output?
Bang.
No.
Spins torque.
Yes. So motion. So you take energy and turn it into motion.
Yeah.
You know, how you do that, you know, that's inside the black box.
All right. Thank you.
Too busy looking at it on my phone to pay attention to your lecture.
Oh, okay.
But did you mention in this one too about the engineering notebook and the taking notes and everything?
Oh, no, that's a good thing to mention because
You did the first time.
yeah, but it came out of a question.
Oh.
Yeah, it came out of a question. Yeah. Okay, so before those of you who are finished just get up and leave, there was a question in the first session that I think everybody should hear the answer to. A student asked, if you're working on the LLS and all you've ever done with your team is you've communicated verbally and done your work, and you don't have a bunch of physical evidence. You didn't text, you didn't message. What will you use as evidence for your LLS? My suggestion, and you still have lots of time to do this, as you're going into your debrief and you will be talking to your team, make notes whenever you have any kind of meeting. Make notes in your engineering notebook and date them. As you can see, whenever I have a meeting, I make notes. They're not as neat and nice as yours will be, but they enable me to remember key points from that. And so that's one of the kinds of evidence you can use, are your own notes in your engineering notebook.
So if you're having a decision that matters, someone should be writing that down. If you're having a discussion that matters, like it should be recorded somehow. Don't let that convince you alone.
Now, if you're done, you can go.